Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us on today's webinar. I hope this finds each of you and yours safe and well. Today, we're going to be talking about the digital divide unfolding during this pandemic and how to work toward inclusion for your nonprofit. I'm Nicole Jones from TechSoup, and I'll be your host today, coming in live from Oakland, California. And in the audience chat, I'd love to know where you're joining in from, so let me know. So we've got Jason from Denver. Hi, Jason. And Dave's on the line. Welcome, Dave. I'll read off more where people are coming from in just a moment. But first, just want to, again, thank you for being here. And before we get to introducing today's very talented presenters and content, here's a little housekeeping. So all lines are muted, but you can ask questions at any time by typing them into the Q&A panel of your webinar. You can share comments in the audience chat, and there's always lots of great conversations happening there. You'll get to hear from other nonprofits, so peek in there from time to time. And as I'm peeking in there, I see we've got Kevin from Seattle. Hi, Kevin. Maria from LA. Sean from Villa Park, Illinois. I used to live right by there. Karen from San Jose. Great. We've got lots of different regions represented, so glad to have you here. So what else? If you lose internet connection, no worries. You can just reconnect using the link that was emailed to you, and you will receive an email with this presentation. And in that email will include the recording, the replay, so you can watch back anything you might have missed. You can also share that. It's also going to include the actual slide deck and then any links that we refer to throughout this presentation. So that will be emailed to you within 24 to 48 hours after this webinar. And there'll be lots of opportunities to engage with us and each other on this webinar. So you can participate by asking questions in the Q&A section for our presenters. We would also love if you could answer our post-event survey that's going to be launched after you exit out of the webinar. And that really helps us understand what type of content we should be producing in the future. And lastly, you can tweet at us at TechSoup and use the hashtag TSWebinar. Thanks for your attention and your engagement. It really makes a difference, especially when I know we're all facing a lot of distractions at home or wherever this might find us. All right, now that we have that covered, just a little bit about TechSoup. So TechSoup is a global network bridging tech solutions and services for good. You may know TechSoup for its software program, but we're so much more than that. We also provide hardware, support, trainings, and more to help more than 1.2 million nonprofits in 236 countries and territories, and we really love to be your resource partner. And to help make that possible, we have over 100 corporate donors and providers of software, hardware, and services who have chosen the TechSoup platform to create and grow impactful and-kind donation programs. You can check out all these great offerings from our partners by visiting the nonprofit tech marketplace. That's at techsoup.org/get-product-donations, and we'll be sure to include that link in the audience chat and in our post-event email. So before we get on to today's content, I also want to share this special resource page. It's at TechSoup.org. It's for nonprofits impacted by COVID-19. So we've compiled these resources from tools to support remote work, webinars like this one, related blog posts, free courses from TechSoup, and so much more. We're constantly updating this page with new resources, which we'll share out in chat. So this is a good page to bookmark and share. Okay, and now on to introductions. So today we're joined by Debra Ruh. She is CEO and founder of Ruh Global Impact. She's also a global disability inclusion strategist, market influencer, internationally recognized keynote speaker, published author, branding expert, successful entrepreneur, and an exceptional mother. She's hosted the popular program Human Potential at Work. And we're also joined by Chief Sustainability Officer for Ruh Global Impact, Lamondre Pugh. Lamondre is host of the podcast 5P with Lamondre, where he combines both his personal and professional missions to create environments where all people have a sense of belonging, where their insights, experiences, and perspectives are truly valued. Lamondre began his career in disability inclusion as a college student in Central South Carolina, where he became the leading advocate at the Disability Action Center, the state's first independent living center. We're so glad to have them, and we're also joined by Stephen Davidson, who'll be supporting on chat. And once again, my name is Nicole Jones, and I'm pleased to be with you all here today. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Debra and Lamondre. Welcome. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you so much, Nicole. We really are very honored to be on here. And so thank you for inviting us. And I'm going to advance the slides for Lamondre and myself. So my name's Debra Ruh, and I am the Chief Executive Officer for Ruh Global Impact, and very proud to have Lamondre here. I know it says I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer, but I'm the CEO. So, but thank you so much for having us. And I'm going to start advancing the slides, hoping to do that correctly. Okay, cool. So we're talking about digital divide during a pandemic and how to work towards inclusion and accessibility for your nonprofit community, because we really want nonprofits and foundations to really thrive during these uncertain times. So I'm going to be doing a few of the slides and then turning the slide deck over to Lamondre, and then he's going to pass it back to me. But just before I begin, maybe Lamondre could say hello to everyone.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited about this webinar. I think that we're going to share a lot of good insights, and please have your questions ready. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide. So this is the understatement of the world. The world has changed. Yeah, the world has changed a lot, especially during this pandemic. It is very confusing, but also the opportunity to I think, really take a look at what's important in the world. Lamondre and I, and the work that we do at Ruh Global is all about inclusion of people with disabilities, really talking about the intersectionality of diversity and inclusion, making sure things are accessible for all of us. If you're going to send everybody home to telework, that's great, but not if the technology and the communications are not accessible, because then we're going to see the digital divide widen, which is what we've seen. So globalization has changed so much about the way we do business, the way we interact with each other. There's a lot of positives with globalization, but there's also impact, as we're seeing as we all shelter at home and stay at home to stay safe, that the world is actually healing, which is fascinating. And we really are very also focused on climate change and climate action at Ruh Global Impact, which is why we have a Chief Sustainability Officer with Lamondre. But medical advances have also changed the world. It has allowed people with more serious disabilities or people that acquire disabilities or injuries to stay alive and to thrive. And I think it's an opportunity for humanity to really look at what it means to be truly human. We are so many different things. I'm a mother, I'm a wife, I'm an individual, I'm a person with ADHD, I'm a Caucasian, I have curly hair, I have purple hair these days. But I'm so many different things, and that's very common. And so the medical advancements have allowed us to have a more diverse population, and it's a real opportunity for us. At the same time, it causes problems for us as well. And of course, technology has changed everything. It would have been very different to go through the sheltering at home, sheltering in place without technology. So technology can be a great equalizer. It can be wonderful, but it also can continue to widen the digital divide if everybody doesn't have access to technology and communications. So then also we have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was a very important convention that was created by the United Nations. Most countries signed and ratified it. The United States signed it, but we did not ratify it, partially because we have our Americans with Disabilities Act, which we will celebrate 30 years in June. So ADA 30, and we've done so much, we've accomplished so much, and we have so much to do. And we're seeing some of the barriers and some of the problems as we walk this COVID-19 crisis, including, we'll talk a little more here about the inaccessibility that we're seeing with websites and getting in touch with people, and it's a really big topic. And then the last one is corporate social responsibility, which impacts all of us, but certainly impacts nonprofits, because as we all know, sometimes when the economies get really bad and things get really scary, especially something like this that we've never seen before, people tighten their belts and they say, okay, well, first thing that's going to go is I'm not going to donate to people, which is a mistake, and we don't want that to happen. We don't want our nonprofits and the organizations in our world that are making positive changes to the world to be so negatively impacted that, we lose all this good work. So all of these things we usually talk about from the lens of including people with disabilities, but more and more we're talking about it more from the lens of we cannot accidentally disenfranchise people by not including them. And we see that happening to segments of people all over the world: poor people, refugees, people of color, people that people with disabilities, and all the other intersectionalities. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. Before I go to the next slide, Lamondre, let me give you, each time I should have told you this, Lamondre, I'll give you a chance to comment. Do you want to comment here or save your remarks till later?
Actually, you covered everything beautifully on that slide. And the thing that I will say is that absolutely the world has changed. And in that, I think what we are discovering is that we actually need to bind closer together and make certain that we're more inclusive of all people, because the world has changed in such a drastic way.
Yeah, good point. Thank you, Lamondre. So I talked a little bit about this before, but it is critical that we close the digital divide. There was a time, legends long ago, there was a time that the digital divide was actually narrowing. And now, of course, it seems to be broadening, and we don't know what to expect, what's going to happen in COVID with the COVID-19 in developing countries. We're seeing it ripping apart developed countries. So we anticipate that the digital divide is going to continue to widen. And we will say that a lot of our nonprofits relied on doing business in a certain way because they had successfully done it for so many years. They would have a nonprofit would have a big gala as their fundraising event, or multiple galas during the year, or all kind of get-togethers. Well, all of that's certainly gone out the window. So what do we do to make sure that we're closing the digital divide for everybody, and certainly for our nonprofits and our social good efforts that are being made? Digital inclusion is an issue, and we're seeing more and more that there is a lack of digital inclusion. I know that when we send all the children home from the COVID-19, according to the United Nations, 40% of children were not able to access education because their parents didn't have reliable Wi-Fi, or they couldn't afford Wi-Fi, or maybe they're in a rural area like I am and you don't have good access. There are a whole lot of different reasons, but 40% of children could not be educated. And that's a huge digital inclusion issue. Of course, people with disabilities continue to be disenfranchised, and unfortunately, a lot of the biases that we see against diversity groups continue to widen during these times. Lamondre and I were talking about this on another show. We're seeing people with severe disabilities being, potentially being denied a ventilator. There are actual laws on the books that say if a person with profound mental retardation, they would not be eligible for a ventilator if somebody without that condition needed the ventilator. Well, I have a daughter with Down syndrome, so needless to say, I have a problem with that law, and I know a lot of other people do as well. And then as a world, we're moving to 5G, which is exciting, but at the same time, there's some real scary things that people are saying about 5G. There's actually some conspiracy theorists theorists that believe that 5G created COVID-19. Anyway, there's some really weird conversations happening. So I bring it up because 5G is so supposed to create something that will help reduce the digital divide and reduce the digital inclusion at the same time. But there's a lot of controversy surrounding it. I'm going to go to the next slide. So accessibility inclusive design. One thing that is critical for nonprofits to understand right now is that you need everyone to have access to your information. You need to make sure that people with disabilities are included, certainly, but to understand that we are an aging society. There are over 70 million baby boomers in the United States, controlling 60% of the wealth. Many of those are your donors. And you need to make sure that people that maybe can't hear as well, or they can't see, or or they can't hear as well, or they have motor conditions that prevent them from clicking on the mouse or navigating your website properly, or their speech, they are nonverbal, or they have a speech that's harder to understand. All of these things need to be considered when you think about accessibility. When you think about how you are putting your messages out there, how are you making your website fully accessible? Is your donor site fully accessible? You always need to be thinking about it from these different buckets. Intellectual, cognitive, blind, vision or vision loss, hard of hearing or deaf, or also called hearing loss, motor skills, and the cognitive is also for people that are aging and not thinking as clearly, and then speech. So from those lenses, it's very important to consider what needs to be done to make sure that your website, all of your marketing materials, your social media, your videos, everything that you're producing is fully accessible. And I'll just give you an example of videos, for example. It's very important to caption a video. Well, everybody hears that, but that's one more step we got to do, Deborah. Even though there's tons of apps and programs out there that will allow you to do captioning on your own, you don't even have to pay for it, or there's services that you can do captioning. But an important thing to note is, according to Facebook and other studies, Verizon did one that found the same results. 80 to 85% of people that watch your videos watch it with the sound off. So if you're not captioning it, you better make sure you're capturing that message in a way that people can understand what you're talking about with the captions turned off, or if you're not providing the captions, because most people are not using captions. So very important to consider that. And when it comes to making sure that Lamontre, I wanted to make sure I'm not counting the slides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So Lamontre, is this the slide you wanted? Excuse me, everyone. This is your last slide. This is my last slide. Thank you. Sorry about that. I had it, then I lost the page numbers. So thank you. So, because Lamontre and I talk a lot about this, inclusion and diversity, intersectionality. One thing, I'm a woman, and so I'm very interested in women's rights, gender equity, that there's so much pay disparity between women. But one thing that I see often between all the diversity groups, the LGBT, the African American, the Asian Americans, all of the human rights conversations, including people with disabilities, neurodiversity, all the different movements, women's issues, we also have to be fully diverse. We have to make sure we're considering diversity within our diversity movements. So if you put a woman on stage because she's going to talk about women's issues, why not select a woman that's an African American and a woman with a disability, so she can talk from 3 different lenses, for example? Or you have Lamontre, who is an African American and a man with disabilities, and he brings different intersectionality conversations to these diversity conversations that can add a lot of richness and a lot of things that we all need to consider, so that we can do our best to make sure all of our voices are heard. But sometimes these diversity movements, they seem very, undiverse. It's just, I know that the women's movement was being criticized because all of the women that were speaking were women of a certain age and they were Caucasian women. So it's just very important that we remember, especially as nonprofits and people trying to make a difference in the world, that we really need to look very carefully at the intersectionality of diversity and inclusion within our own groups, all the way from identity, social justice, sex, all the different things, including caregiving, and there's just so many sections that it seems often the representatives are not diverse enough. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Lamondre.
Absolutely, and I think you make a very strong point, especially with the concept of when those voices come together and all the different intersectionalities come together, we are definitely stronger. And I think that can be expressly seen in the nonprofit realm. I am the chairman of a nonprofit here in South Carolina that seeks to connect people with disabilities to the arts. And so there's an incredible amount of cross that happens there. And the thing that I've realized is that by making things accessible for all people, you make it better for everyone, particularly for people with disabilities. And there is indeed a great divide that's out there. But here's something that's really interesting, I think, that's happening, that all of our generations, they expect positive impacts. There are always social movements that happen throughout all of the generations. But what's interesting about this particular generation, the younger generation, is that they're looking for organizations and brands that are intentionally and purposefully looking to make a positive difference in the world. You look at some of the voices that have stood up and that are really, really making things happen right now. You think about what's happening with the environment and young advocates like Greta, or look at what happened with the mass shootings that happened at the high school, and the young people stood up. And so they're really getting behind organizations that are more inclusive. And organizations that have a diverse workforce must include people with disabilities. And this also includes nonprofit organizations. And the reason that is because the workforce has changed, particularly with COVID-19. It was almost like a great experiment before, where people were telecommuting and working from home, and some companies really took to it and others not so much. And then the world changed, and those who could asked their employees to work from home. So everything has changed now. Here's the issue. That opens up the door, or here's the opportunity. It opens up the door for a much more diverse workforce to really step forward. And the thing is, we are looking for, employers are looking for people who can bring value, people who have different perspectives, who can problem solve, who see things in a different light. This opens the door for that, because that's what we do. That's what people with disabilities do. And the employees expect their employers to align with positive social impact and positive social outcomes. And these are the things that are so important now. And I know that every nonprofit that's on this call, you're established for a good. You're established to promote a good. And one of the best ways to do that is by recognizing the fact that you do have impact far beyond the stated mission of what it is that you do. But your workforce, the people that work for you, the people who help carry out the mission, having diverse perspectives represented there also pushes that forward. Go to the next slide. So technology, Debra mentioned some various technologies, and technology has always been the great equalizer for people with disabilities. I mean, we can go all the way back to things like curb cuts and eyeglasses and all of these different technologies that allow people with disabilities to really interact in the world on a more equal basis, on a more equal playing field. And it's so interesting because a lot of times when people think about disabilities, I remember when I was growing up, And I use a wheelchair. I'm a full-time wheelchair user. I have spinal muscular atrophy. Can't really use my hands all that well. In fact, I need someone to feed me. I need someone to help me with my getting up in the morning and all those kinds of things. And I remember as my disability progressed as I was growing up, I used to walk. And when I wasn't able to walk again at about 9 years old and I got my first wheelchair, a lot of people's attitude was, oh, wow, he's wasting away. He's got to go to a wheelchair now. My attitude was, whoa, you mean I can roll around in this chair and pretty much go anywhere that I want to and not get tired? I was over the moon with it. Then at about the age of 13, I had to move to a power chair. And when I got in the power chair, people were like, wow, his muscles are just wasting away. It's so sad. My perception was, wait a minute, you mean to tell me I can press a button and my chair will go wherever I want it to go? These are the things that technology has allowed for us. So in other words, technology not only changes the world for people with disabilities, but it really opens up the world. And especially in this digital age that we live in, your website or your electronic communications can either be an open door or a locked, solidly gate that prohibits people from interacting with your organization. So that means that it prohibits giving, it prohibits interaction, it prohibits a promotion of the particular cause. However, with just some very simple things, some insight and some looking into it, we can open those doors. We can make things more inclusive for people with disability. And so I want to talk about what kinds of things we can do to begin to bridge that divide. Let's advance to the next slide. This is about a change in perspective. So why do we start there? The reason that I start there with perspective, and I believe that this is probably the biggest thing, is because when we think about the biggest barriers that face people with disabilities, particularly as it relates to inclusion, it's not about ramps, it's not about curb cuts, it's not even about the websites. The biggest barrier that most people with disabilities face are attitudinal barriers, how we feel about things and how we see the world. In fact, when you think about it, it's the kind of thing whereas if we thought differently about inclusion, if we thought differently about how we build buildings, if we thought differently about how we design websites, there would not be any access issues at all. So this is why I say perspective. So the first thing is inclusion must be a part of the broader agenda. So often what happens, particularly when you talk about including people with disabilities, it is looked at as a special group that's over there somewhere. That's for those people over there. Or we're doing this because it's something special that we must do. Now, we have our main mission, we have our main agenda, we have our main goals, but then we tack on this at the end. And I believe that inclusion must be a part of the broad agenda to where it's woven into the fabric, into the very DNA of what the agenda is. Now, it does not have to be that it becomes the overriding theme, but it must be an essential part of it. Because ultimately, what do we want? We want our cause and our issues to be heard. I'm talking about as a nonprofit. We want the platform that we stand on, we want that to be moved forward. Well, one of the ways that we do this is making certain that all of the people who are affected by this can be included in that. And I'll tell you this as well. Disability is the only minority group that anyone can join at any time. The only minority group that anyone can join at any time. And this could be as a result of illness, accident, or if you just keep on aging, the process of aging, it can cause disability. So disability must be a part of the broader agenda because it's definitely impacting the people who make up a part of your organization. So making it a part of the broader agenda, finding the champions. Now, finding the champions, finding the people in your organization that can help move the agenda forward in terms of inclusion, finding the people who care about this, finding the people who may not necessarily be directly impacted by it, but nonetheless are people that can speak to your cause, that can speak to the issues that are there. People who may have access to areas that you don't necessarily have access to, but nonetheless, they can open those doors for you. But in finding a champion, it's also important that we are the champions, not just for disability inclusion, but for other things as well. You heard about Debra talk about the intersectionality of diversity and disability and inclusion and how it's all intersected. Well, this is a part of not only finding the champions, but being a champion as well. The next point is get commitment at the highest levels of the organization. This one is key. This is key primarily because so often when we talk about inclusion and inclusion initiatives, again, we get kind of siloed out to, oh, that's for that group over there. But having commitment from the highest level means that it changes the complexion of the organization. And then the organization's leadership begins to move in a realm of inclusion and how we move forward. So that means when decisions are made, it will be made filtered through the lens of inclusion. And then the fourth piece of it is being honest in your assessment. Well, what do we mean by being honest in your assessment? Be honest with where you are. Getting an organization like ours to come in and assess what it is that you're doing in your electronic communications, your PDFs, and really finding out where you are, because the only way to really begin to be inclusive is to understand your inclusion position at its current time. And how do we move beyond that? How do we get to a place where we understand where we are, this is what it is, and now this is the direction that we want to go in? So be honest in your assessment. Be honest in where you are in terms of inclusion. Debra, anything you want to add to that?
No, but some of us were chatting on the audience, and everybody was talking about what a great voice you have, which I agree with. But I also agree, Lamondre, that we're all stronger together, and it's interesting that the reality is of people that have disabilities, like my daughter. My daughter was born with disabilities. Lamondre, you were born with a disability. But 80% of people that acquire disabilities as we live our lives, having a disability doesn't mean you're broken. It just means you're human. You're human. So I like the one where you talk about be honest in your assessment, Lamondre, because some of us, and Lamondre, you and I are diehard optimists, but sometimes we tend to be a little bit more optimistic. And I think it's really important to really honestly do an assessment. And I know we were having some an audience chat. We were talking a little bit about and I know we have time because I'm watching the clock to make sure that Nicole doesn't use that hook and pull me off. But
doing great.
One thing, well, I think the audience, some of the audience were talking about some of the language around this conversation. And I think it's really important because here in the States, we really talk a lot about, and I'm curious I want to get your perspective on this, Lamondre, while we're still on this slide, but people first language is certainly very, very important. And here in the United States, we try really hard to honor that. A person that is blind, a person with Down syndrome, a person first language. And Sherry was noting that they use the term exceptionalities, which is a great term. And Janet was saying they use the term diverse abilities. And I know that's something that Ernst & Young uses a lot. But Mary made the point, which I thought was such a great point, because actually the ARC, I know somebody from the ARC is on, and we were talking a little bit about the ARC, but she was making the point that their clients identify more closely with disabled person or person with a disability. And you have to think about what your donors do, what aligns with them. I remember when I first moved from Florida to Virginia, and I have my daughter's 33 years old now with Down syndrome, and the ARC, at the time, the Association of Retarded Citizens was the name of the organization, and they asked me to get involved in Hanover, and I said, well, I don't want to be mean, but I don't like that you use the word retarded in your name, the Association of Retarded Citizens. And they're like, well, do you know that we thought about changing the name, but every time we try, our donations go down. And when your donations go down, you can't help those people with intellectual disabilities or cognitive disabilities. So I just thought that was, I never thought about that perspective, which came up in the audience chat. But it's a viable thing. It's a balance. Now, what they did was they decided to go with the ARC, and most people don't know that what the ARC used to stand for, but language sometimes has to change with times. But Lamondre, I was just wondering if you wouldn't mind giving us your perspectives on that.
Absolutely. Language definitely does have to change with times, but I also believe that, well, let me back up and say this. First of all, I believe that you should call people what they want you to call them, because ultimately it is they who define who they are. My name is Lamondre. It is not David. Do not call me David. I will not answer to David, but I am Lamondre. Now, having said that, times change and we see things differently, and many times the meanings of things change. Just to give you a prime example, as I said, I have spinal muscular atrophy, and I am a huge supporter of the Muscular Dystrophy Association, the MDA. Now, when I was a child, I used to be involved in the telethons and all those kinds of things. And when I got old enough, I realized that the imagery that was being presented to the world of people with disabilities through the telethon was not something that I agreed with at any rate, in no way, shape, or form. And what ended up happening was I began to protest. In fact, I remember one of the last telethons, when they still did telethons back in the day, one of the last telethons I was on, I was probably about 22 years old. And because they knew me as a child, I came on, and I said before we went on air, do not call me a Jerry's kid. And the guy said, oh, come on, man, you're I know you're an adult now, but I was like, please, whatever you do not call me a Jerry's kid. And as soon as the cameras came on, he said, hi, I am here with Lamondre. He's one of Jerry's older kids. And I dropped my head. And in that moment, as he came to me, when he said, how are you, Lamondre? I said, I'm fine. And I'm not a Jerry's kid, even if I'm older, because if I am, he owes my mother a whole lot of child support. And that was the last time I was ever on telethon. But the reason that was because the times had changed, and I realized that it should have been about a message of empowerment. And I will say now, it is amazing. It is amazing how this organization has changed the way that it promotes what it is that we actually do. And I am a strong supporter, so much so that I am an ambassador now of the Muscular Dystrophy Association, because it's not about what those things represented before. It is now about empowering people to live full lives. And that's what it's about. So when we start talking about language, I think it's important that we understand. It's important that we understand where we are now, the times that we live in, and what the majority of that group wants to go with. I think it's great if someone wants to say exceptionalities, if someone wants to say diversability. But honestly, for me, disability works fine, because I am a person with a disability. I'm very proud to be a person with a disability because I live my life to the fullest. And I think I'm pretty sexy. That's just my opinion, though. That's just my opinion. That's it.
We agree with you, Lamondre. Yeah, very well said. And it was interesting as people were talking in the audience chat, because sometimes you really do have to change. I mean, we had another example that was put in here by Jeff. Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network has now changed to, I lost my place, GLSEN, pronounced glisten. And I'll just say, Jeff, I had a girlfriend when I'm 60 plus, and when I was in school, I had a girlfriend named Gay. And I thought, boy, as her life progressed, people must have harassed her about having her name Gay, but it used to mean, fun, and it's just interesting how times have changed. So let me go on. I know we have some good questions, so I want to make sure we leave time for that. So I'm going to go to the next slide. The new world, the new normal. We are all still figuring out what this is going to look like, and I think we're going to have, it's going to take us a while, but I am hopeful that all this rethinking about the world mean that how should the world work? Should the world really be inclusive to people with disabilities? Should it matter if you do social good work like you're working for a nonprofit, or should you to continue to starve to death because you're just a do-gooder? I mean, I really think we need to rethink all the ways that we look at the work that people are doing in the world. Is it giving back or is it not giving back? So sometimes nonprofits get a lot of harassment about not being effective, not being responsive, and things like that. I hear that a lot from corporate clients. And I'll say to them, well, what are you doing to support nonprofits? Because you're supposed to be making a difference in the world through your corporate social responsibility efforts. Hopefully you are supporting what nonprofits are doing or what nonprofits and other organizations are doing to make the world a better place. But society needs nonprofits to lead the way during these times. I use the example of the ice bucket challenge. I forget how much they raised, but I know it was in the millions. And everybody got into it. And I wanted to make sure that I showed people with disabilities doing it because we all got involved. But it was such a fabulous, fabulous thing to do, and everybody enjoyed doing it. Really, you want me to dump ice on over my head or over my daughter's head with Down syndrome? Who are you? But it really got people really standing behind ALS. And so I think part of the way that we're going to have to move forward is we're going to have to think about things like this, certainly using the right language, adopting to the right language. Remember that some of your donors that have aged into disabilities, we're not used to being people with disabilities. And so the language that we use for ourselves might be different from somebody that is born with a disability and is really owning it. A lot of the young people, the younger generations with disabilities, they're owning it. Like Lamondre just doing, not only am I wonderful and great, I'm sexy too. And by the way, I think he is, if I'm allowed to say that as his boss and partner, but it's true. And so accessibility and inclusion are critical. It's the only way forward. And I remember a bank, and I won't tell you which bank, but I remember a bank brought me in to talk to 150 of their executives about I'm going to give you the timeline. It's about a year and a half ago. And they said, we've worked on accessibility. We are hiring people with disabilities. We have disability and diversity policies. But they said, but we don't know what to do with our patrons and our high net worth individuals that are aging into disabilities because they don't really understand or want to identify with the groups, and we don't know how to support them. And so it's something that y'all need to remember, too, that even if a person is clearly a part of the disability community, for example, they might not identify that way. I know my father, who acquired very severe disabilities, lung cancer, and he was on oxygen, he would never identify as a person with a disability, and I thought that was a shame. So remember that we all have to reduce the digital divide. Patrons are aging. So you have to be creative, and I think we all know you've got to take your message online. You've got to make sure that it's accessible, inclusive, and that also it's fun. Lamondre used the word sexy, and he said part of his mission is to put the sexy in disability. Because let's stop assuming people can't add value because they have a disability. That's ridiculous. So, Lamondre, let me turn it over to you to comment on this slide if you want to.
Absolutely. I think that something that's important to keep in mind, because we're talking about a number of different elements of this, but one of the things that I think is so important is also even as we move along and even as we begin to make progress, we have to be cognizant that this is a learning environment for all of us. All of this is, for many of us, this is a whole new world. It's a brave new world. And so we have to be patient with each other. And what I mean by patient, I don't mean, take time, because, things like the ADA and the Convention for People, the Rights on Persons with Disabilities, they've been around for quite some time. So, but what I mean by be patient is that when people make mistakes, if people misspeak, if people are sometimes using the wrong language, let's correct, but let's correct with the sense of, I know that this person wants to do this right. This person genuinely wants to do the right thing. Because so often what happens is we can come off, especially once we kind of know and we have a path to go on, we can really, really, really be hard on people that don't necessarily deserve to be hard on. But if we are honest in our assessments, if we're really looking at this thing and making it inclusive for everyone, I believe we can get through this. So I love the be creative portion of it. I love the whole concept of moving the message online and really connecting with people in various ways. Because even though, as we said, we're socially distant or physically distant, that doesn't mean we have to be disconnected. And this is what this is about, bringing the connections together.
Agree. And Mary mentioned telling the stories in her audience chat, and it really is about telling the story. We all love the stories. Tell me a story. I'm going to be so much more engaged with you. Tell the stories, and also tell the stories of hope. So let me go to the next slide, which is our contact information. And Nicole, I know there are questions because I see there's some in queue, so I want to make sure that we left enough time with that. And the audience chat, wow, there's some real rich content going on in there. So very exciting.
Yes, thank you so much, Debra and Lamondre. And yes, the audience chat is on fire. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your perspectives, your questions, your ideas. I really appreciate it, and keep it coming. So I am going to go ahead and just read some of those now. We have Jenna, who says, as a representative of the ARC, a nonprofit that promotes and protects the human rights of those with developmental disabilities, the issue around accessing fair medical care is a serious concern right now. I know you responded a little bit to that in chat, Debra, but anything else that you want to add on top of that? Debra, are you with us?
I'm sorry. My audio cut out just for a second. Do you mind repeating the question?
Oh, no problem. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So this is a comment from Jenna, and I saw you respond to it in chat, but would love to have you respond out loud. As a representative of the ARC, a nonprofit that promotes and protects the human rights of those with developmental disabilities, the issue around accessing fair medical care is a fair concern right now. So what would you say to that?
Well, I absolutely
right
agree. Yeah, I agree, and it's interesting because you can look at it from two different points. I mean, we for years have been saying include us, include us, include us, and so then we started being included. Yay, we started being included in the workforce, and it was interesting because some of my daughter's friends, my daughter has Down syndrome. She's 33 years old. She's in a supported apartment, and some of her friends, started dying because they were actually bagging groceries for people that didn't know they had the COVID-19. And so we're seeing things happening to people with cognitive disabilities that are really, really frightening and scary, being denied access, not getting medical help quick enough. There is laws on our books. I know there's a law on the books in Alabama that says if you have severe mental retardation, you would not be eligible for a ventilator. Well, who gets to decide what severe means? Because my daughter has a classification of mental retardation, but how dare you decide that her life doesn't matter? I just have a huge problem with what we're doing right now, and it's showing once again, and the same thing, Lamondre and I just did a show about this, about African Americans, what's happening in the community there. They are actually being turned away at hospitals saying, no, you're not sick, and going home and dying of the COVID-19. So what we're seeing is where we knew there were problems, the pressure points on those problems are growing, and I'm frightened about what I'm seeing happening to people with intellectual disabilities. I don't have the answers, but I agree it's a huge issue, and that's why events like this, Nicole, are just so important so we can talk about them.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks, Debra. And a question that's come up quite a bit are around recommendations for software, especially for free captioning services, to make online events more accessible. And do you have any recommendations or resources that you point people to for that?
Well, I will say I have a couple of things, and I said in the chat that Nicole and Lamondre and I have talked about collaborating with TechSoup, and we're going to talk more about that. But one thing I think would be nice for us to do, Nicole, is maybe have a checklist of some things that they could do to make sure their websites, their apps, their social media are accessible and inclusive. So we could give a checklist that you could provide. But there's some free tools out there. They're not really very good, but there's a few of them that are better. YouTube actually has captioning, so you can turn captioning on. You could put your YouTube video out there and turn the captions on, whether somebody captioned them or not. Google Chat now has captionings all the time. Now, there's another tool that somebody told us about that'll actually capture those so that you can take the video and use them, but I don't remember it off the top of my head. I know that a lot of our team members are here. So Richard and David Perez, if y'all remember the name of that app, pop it in here. But that's something that we'll provide to Nicole as a cheat sheet. But there's another app. There's multiple apps, but there's an app that I use. It's called Clip-O-Matic, Clipomatic. And it's $4.99 a year, but it allows me to do a selfie video. So, but it's only for iPhone. So unfortunately, if you have an Android, that one doesn't work. But you can type it in and you can actually edit it. Jane was making a comment that unfortunately the YouTube automatic captioning it's okay, but you have to read through it and edit it because they get things wrong a lot. Just like what is it? The ducking autocorrect? Ducking, I said ducking. So, thank you, Nicole. So there are some really nice tools to do it. They're getting better. They're getting much better, but there are also some tools like Rev.com, 3Play Media, where you can you can get captions and transcriptions. So there's a lot of different things, but it's still growing. It's still developing. So it's not where we want it to be yet, but there's some inexpensive ones. There's some free ones. It just sort of depends on what you're doing. Zoom does not have caption. I just saw Sharon ask. But what we do our shows on Zoom, and then we send them out for captioning on our own team, or we use Rev, or we use 3Play, and then we embed them in Zoom. So it has the ability to embed them in Zoom, where something like Facebook Live, we kept embedding them in, and they kept losing it. We would embed it, and they'd lose it again. So it's very, very important that everything that we do is accessible just because of our conversation. But sorry for the long answer, but that's a few points.
Yeah, thanks. That's really helpful. Yes, there's lots of different tools out there. So looking forward to putting some content together on that to share with the community. And just a note that this webinar, you will get a replay. So you'll get to go back and watch anything you might have missed. And we will have a transcript available as well, and the slides. All the slides will be included in a post-event email that you will get within 24 to 48 hours after this webinar. So you can go back, revisit anything you might have missed, and share it as well. All right, let's go to another question here. This one's from Megan. And she says, thank you so much for doing this webinar. Nonprofit boards should also be diverse. A lot of work still needs to be done on this front. Do you know of any resources to help nonprofits identify board members from diverse populations?
Well, what an excellent point. And Lamondre, I know that you probably want to comment on this, but that is such a good point. And I don't think I have groups that come to me and ask me to be on boards all the time. And I haven't thought about it from that lens. That's I've thought about it of we need diverse boards, but I haven't thought about it from the perspective of, making sure that about the Lamondre Pughs of the world, or Rosemary Musachios, or other people with different disabilities. So that's a really, really good point. Lamondre, let me let you come in on, but I don't know of any groups that do that, but we always are happy to recommend people. We'll do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That is always one of the struggles of boards, is finding diverse groups of people that that has the skill set that you need for your particular board. So the thing that I've done as chairman for Arts Access is that we interact and network with just a ton of different groups that may not have anything to do with the arts, organizations that may not have anything to do with what our actual mission is, but it's someone who is passionate about it and has the skill set that we're looking for. And honestly, having those networks, because it's so easy to get tunnel vision and only focus in the community that's involved directly with your nonprofit organization. So the thing that has worked for us is to step outside of those realms and just be really, really active in telling the story, number one, but also making certain that we show interest in other stories as well for other groups and companies and different civic organizations. So to answer your question, I don't know of any particular resource that focuses on diversity for board members, but the thing that's really worked for us is that we've been able to step outside of what is like the arts community or the disability community in South Carolina and reach beyond that to find people who may be passionate about those things, who may not have been involved in it before.
And Lamondre, two people in chat said David Redmond, Roundtree, said he does that. And then also William said boardbuild.org will help with that too. So you have Beautiful. Two resources right in the audience chat. They're also asking Nicole if that will be saved because so many resources were included in the chat. So, and we will turn it back to you, Nicole.
Yes. There is just so much great sharing happening in here, especially right now with different tools. So I will be sure to save this audience chat. So just a note for the Global Meet team, just to give me like a minute to save it before we close out. We still have time for a couple questions, but I do want to make sure I can save that chat and that we send it in the post-event email so you can go back and check all those things. Great. Let's go on to a couple. We have time for just a couple more questions. There's so many good ones. I wish we could get to all of them. Let's move to this question. This is from Amy. And this is more about technology. She says, I am particularly interested in learning about technology that can help my organization easily connect with individuals who have intellectual and developmental disabilities over video. She says, we're working to provide support in connection with adults with neurodiversity and social groups and trying to connect via Zoom. But just any suggestions around connecting with people who are, who have a variety of abilities over video?
Well, I will say that my daughter has been trying to keep in touch with her peers via Zoom. She goes to a day program, which is a farm. It's really amazing, Full Pocket Farm. And every week on Thursdays at 1 o'clock, they do a Zoom call. And it took them a little while to work out the kinks and stuff. But what I find is that my daughter is very technically savvy, but some of her peers aren't. So I know sometimes people assume because she has an intellectual disability, she won't be technically savvy. And it's always funny to see somebody underestimate my daughter because she always teaches them. But I'm finding that, we all have had different problems with, Zoom. You had the Zoom people crashing in, so we had to do passwords and things like that. But I find it is at first you have some technical issues, but once people get used to it and they, for example, downloading the app, you're going to usually get more functionality and joining the meetings. But some of it is just people having the right communications, the right technology, and working through the kinks, and then they seem to catch on really fast. At least that's what I'm seeing. Lamondre, I don't know if you're seeing something different.
No, that's it. I think that as those kinds of things become more and more prevalent, that people are adopting them so much more readily. And I think that, with anything like that, folks will catch on to it. So I see that same thing.
Great. Let's take this question from, and I think it's going to have to be our last one, and this is from Angelica, but she'd love to know, what can libraries do more to include everyone, especially during these times?
Well, libraries have the responsibility, just like everybody else does, to make sure all of the information that they provide, all of the content they provide is fully accessible. And I understand that's always, a little bit more difficult to do, but libraries more than anyone else have to, libraries are I love libraries, and they're such a bedrock of our communities, and I think more and more they're becoming local community places for people to gather. So I think libraries need to check with their own patrons, especially if they have different disabilities, to see how they can help. Because what I find is people of the community a lot of times do want to help and contribute and volunteer. So, don't feel like you have to do it on your own. Seek advice from patrons. I mean, we're here. We've given our information in the link, but there are a lot of libraries and museums making some very interesting efforts all over the world, and I'm happy to connect you with some of those leaders, and they can tell you what they've done if that helps. Lamondre, did you want to make a comment?
Absolutely. First of all, I absolutely love the library systems as well. Yes. And the thing that I would say, particularly things that libraries can do, is first of all make certain that all of your communications are accessible. And if you're not sure, make certain that you ask patrons who may have different kinds of access issues to ask them. Ask them straight up. What can we do better? What are the things that you would see that we could do? And I also think it's important that you distribute as much information as you can in the different formats that are available to you, particularly since people are not really going in and congregating at this point. But I will tell you, I spend a lot of time in the Richland County Public Library System here in South Carolina, and it is absolutely amazing. We used to think of them as just as places that stored books, but truthfully now it is absolutely a cultural center for the cities, and the various branches of that as well. So kudos to the folks with the libraries, and I think you add so much to communities across the board. So just make certain that everything you put out is done in different formats and that people have access to it.
Which is a really good point. Yeah. Nicole, can I just say one more thing?
Yes.
One thing I see, though, sometimes is do take the time to check your resources. Stephanie just put in a link to the American Library Association that has some good resources. Share with each other. But sometimes I'll see a group trying to solve a problem and they don't really ask the audience. And I'll give you an example. The bus systems here in Richmond, Virginia, one of their board members was blind, and she's like, why is the bus schedules not accessible? So they did a knee-jerk reaction. They took all of their bus schedules and they brailled them. Well, most people that are blind don't read Braille. There's only a small percent that do. And also, if you do something that's in Braille is hard copy. So bus schedules can change daily. All they had to do was go out and put those bus schedules in an accessible Word format or an accessible text format or an accessible PDF format, and they would have been done. But instead, they wasted $25,000 because as soon as they brailled that schedule, the schedule changed. So be sure to ask questions, go to people like, things like this, and make sure that you're spending your time wisely when you're trying to provide access. Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, thanks for adding that on. And just everything that you've shared with us today, I've certainly learned a lot. I've learned a lot from people who have shared comments and ideas in the audience chat, and I can tell a lot of people had a great exchange with one another. We'll be sure to share that audience chat that will go in the post-event email along with a transcript of this webinar, the replay, and the slides. So you will get all of that 24 to 48 hours after this webinar. And I'm sorry we didn't get time to get to everyone's questions here, but you've given us a lot to think about at TechSoup and how we can continue to engage with one another on this content, on this topic. So please stay tuned for that and more details. And with that, I just want to thank everyone again, especially Lamondre and Debra. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you. It was wonderful, and I was very impressed with the audience. Usually the audience isn't so engaged, so very compliments to these leaders here.
Absolutely.
Agreed. Okay, with that, once you X out of the webinar, you will see a post-event survey. Please take just a few moments to fill that out. That really helps us in planning for future webinar content to be able to serve all of you better. So again, thank you so much for attending. Have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, and we'll see you all very soon again. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Thank you.